What Rob didn't know was that his neighbour, listening through the wall, had called university security.
There were two guys, and he stuck his foot in the door. He had boots on, and he stuck his boot in the door, so I couldn't close it. And he said, "You've been saying some very offensive things in here." And I went, kind of, what? What do you? Is this a joke?
If only. The boot in Rob's door was deadly serious. A jackboot for our times. A sign of an extreme, frankly bonkers ideology that's somehow taken root in our universities and workplaces, all in the name of promoting DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion. In a dorm room at the University of Exeter in southwest England, philosophy student Rob Ivinson is on the phone to an old friend. Rob's aunt, who'd been like a second mother to him, has just died.
Which was quite a blow. She didn't have any kids, and we were quite close. And the first 10 or 15 minutes of the conversation were just condolences and how I was doing.
The conversation drifted into the current affairs of the time in 2019. Syria, Russia.
We sort of have arguments, conversations, playing devil's advocate for one another, that sort of thing. And my friend mentioned the gay propaganda laws that Russia had passed. And I said that I didn't really like what went on. It wasn't about them being gay or not. It was about that I wouldn't like that sort of display if it was heterosexual either. So I said, I don't really like gay pride parades. I wouldn't really like heterosexual pride parades. I don't really like I don't really like public displays of affection to that degree.
15 minutes after the phone call came to an end,
I had a knock at the door.
What Rob didn't know was that his neighbour, listening through the wall, had called university security.
There were two guys, and he stuck his foot in the door. He had boots on, and he stuck his boot in the door, so I couldn't close it. And he said, "You've been saying some very offensive things in here." And I went, kind of, what? What do you? Is this a joke?
If only. The boot in Rob's door was deadly serious. A jackboot for our times. A sign of an extreme, frankly bonkers ideology that's somehow taken root in our universities and workplaces, all in the name of promoting DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion. A self-righteous, simplistic worldview that might be forgivable for two stone freshers comparing their gap years milking yaks in Tibet. But this stuff has captured the minds of CEOs, university presidents, and impacted millions of people. Crudely sowing division, trampling over fairness and free speech, and demonising men. But let us return to that boot in Rob Ivinson's door in the University of Exeter. Security has just confronted him about a private phone call in his dorm room. Rob was then summoned to a meeting with university administrators.
And what immediately became apparent was that she was going to be judge, jury, and executioner. And I was specifically not given information about what was going to happen in the lead up. I wasn't told I asked. And they started to read out what I was supposed to have said. And the first thing they read out to me was that was veganism is stupid. And I was so taken aback. I could not believe that I was there for my opinions on veganism, that I had to ask them to repeat it 3 or 4 times. I thought I'd said something else.
His protestations that this was one side of a private call made from his own room, twisted words overheard through a brick wall, went nowhere, nor was he allowed to see the written complaints.
I think it was motivated out of a hyper precaution and a hypersensitivity towards anyone that could conceivably be considered a minority, a desire to read discomfort as harm. I think would be probably the best way of saying it.
The university put Rob on a disciplinary contract. He lost his position as a resident mentor, worth £4,500 a year to him. Already struggling with his aunt's death, the process broke him. He moved out of halls to live outside Exeter and withdrew from university life.
I was incredibly depressed. I was on some pretty heavy antidepressants and sleeping medication because of what had been going on with my aunt. I was broke.
At Exeter, Rob Ivinson is struggling to see many benefits to the diversity winds blowing through campus. The phone call incident knocked his confidence and academic progress. He's slowly getting back on track.
I did my master's last year. That's sort of going on. I have my dissertation and a few essays to finish. I deferred them. And now I'm doing teacher training, which maybe a slight hesitation about doing this interview because of that. But again, I'm not really going to go and hide away for fear of repercussions. It's not even that I couldn't live with myself. It's not what I'm just not that sort of person.
Unlike some of the other protests that have been all the rage at Exeter, weeks camped out to signal displeasure about the Middle East, there hasn't been an outpouring of support for his case. But word of Rob's treatment did reach a lecturer in his department at Exeter, Edward Skidelsky. The historical parallels leapt out.
Yeah, that was the kind of thing that I associated in my mind with, communist Russia or Nazi Germany. So that was a real wake-up for me. I actually lived in Russia for a couple of years in the mid-90s, so this was after the communist era, but it had only been a few years beforehand, so, it was still very much in the air. People talked about it a lot, and, one of the things they said is that you had to be very careful who you spoke to. Among friends or among family, you could say pretty much anything you wanted, but in any official context, you had to watch your language very carefully. You had to mouth certain official pieties. And when I spotted the same things in England, it immediately reminded me of that. I saw the similarities straight away. And people who've come from former communist countries also spot the similarities very, very quickly.
Motivated by Rob's case and a wider censorship he's seen of views that don't conform to the mainstream, and a safetyism towards not offending people, Edward Skidelsky has set up the Committee for Academic Freedom.
But it may be too little too late. I mean, one quite worrying statistic is that intolerance is much stronger among the young than among the old. So there was a piece of research done recently by Eric Kaufman looking at responses to J.K. Rowling's cancellation. And what he found is that among the 18 to 25 age group, 50% thought that her publisher should drop her. Whereas among the over 50s, hardly anyone did. Now, if that cohort moves up and doesn't change its views, then in 30 years they'll be in charge, right? And
there are about 250,000 academics working in higher education in Britain. So far, the committee's pledge to academic freedom has been openly signed by 582.